Google got a big AI win in the courtroom, while Anthropic took a big AI loss. And OpenAI may have solved hallucinations. Although we didn't get a new large language model update this week, what we did get is more AI news and headlines than the average person can handle. And if that feels like the position that you're in, don't worry. That's what we do every single Monday here on Everyday AI, bringing you the AI news that matters. What's going on, y'all? My name is Jordan Wilson, and welcome to Everyday AI. This is your daily live stream podcast and free daily newsletter helping everyday business professionals like you and me not just learn AI, but how we can leverage all of this information and updates to grow our companies and careers. If that's what you're trying to do, it starts here with the unedited, unscripted live stream podcast. But if you want to take it to the next level, you make sure to go to our website. That's your cheat code at everydayai.com. So there you can sign up for the free daily newsletter where each day we recap that day's live stream podcast, but we also keep you up to date with everything else going on in the world of AI. So make sure you go do that. Speaking of what's going on in the world of AI, there was a ton this week. So let's get straight into it. Podcast audience, if you didn't know, you can always join us live if you want to, 7:30 a.m. Chicago time. I'll just say that instead of Central Standard. Let's just call it Chicago time. So live stream audience, great to see you. Brent Bronson and Michelle, Big Bogey Face, everyone else. Joe, thanks for tuning in. And Brian, Jose, Dennis, Cecilia. Good to see you, y'all. Let's get straight into it. A ton going on in AI news this week. So don't spend hours a day trying to keep up. Just join us on Mondays. So first, is OpenAI going to try to compete with Microsoft with an AI-powered job board? Well, that's because Microsoft obviously owns LinkedIn, and OpenAI just announced that they're kind of creating a job board that might compete with LinkedIn. So, OpenAI has announced that it's building an AI-centered jobs platform to match qualified candidates with employers, with a target launch by mid-2026, according to a company statement. So, the move positions OpenAI in a potential competition with Microsoft's LinkedIn, despite Microsoft being OpenAI's largest backer with an estimated $13 billion invested over the years. So OpenAI's head of applications said that the new AI-powered jobs platform will include tracks for big companies, local businesses, and local governments to find AI talent. So OpenAI will expand also its OpenAI Academy with tiered certifications in AI fluency from basics to prompt engineering using ChatGPT's study mode, which quizzes and coaches rather than just giving direct answers. So OpenAI aims to certify 10 million Americans by 2030, and organizations can embed these certifications into their training programs. OpenAI is already working with Walmart on this initiative, one of the largest U.S. private employers. So OpenAI argues that workers with AI skills earn more on average, citing research from labor market analytics firm Lightcast indicating salary premiums for roles requiring AI competencies. So, pretty interesting move here from OpenAI with their announcement on this AI-centered jobs platform. And it's also said that users will be able to gain their certifications without ever leaving the ChatGPT platform, which is pretty interesting. So it's not like there's a dedicated, LMS study, style module where you will study for certain certifications. So it's kind of interesting and ushering in a new era of AI learning where you will reportedly just be able to gain these certifications in ChatGPT itself using ChatGPT. Kind of meta. And I'm not talking about Facebook. So we'll see how or if this takes off. However, I do see a lot of people, wanting to flock to this because there hasn't been a lot of certifications, I think, that have separated kind of AI talent. So you have, the big ones from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc. But for whatever reason, a lot of people, I think, pin those to more like marketing, right? You're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go get this, the Google AI certification or the Microsoft or the Amazon, but it's only going to be really applicable for that company's software. Whereas ChatGPT is the most used AI chatbot in the world, and it's not even really close. So, number one, it's kind of interesting to me that OpenAI took this long to offer a certification. Number two, I think it's going to be pretty popular when it comes out, just because of the sheer number of even Fortune 500 companies in the US that are using ChatGPT Enterprise. But also, it is one of those certifications that I think won't be viewed as only being applicable for one type of work or using one kind of piece of software, right? Because I do think when people think of AI, they think of ChatGPT, right? Even though it's not like that, and I don't think it should be like that. That's how a lot of people think. So I think that this open AI certification, outside of just the job board aspect, I think people will view this, especially very early on, as a huge leg up and just as a sign of AI proficiency. So I'll save my judgments until I can get my hands kind of on this certification and to see it's like, okay, is this really a good gauge on if someone has actually learned something? Or is it just like, all right, you can use ChatGPT long enough to just anyone pass the certification? So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. I'd love to hear what our live stream audience thinks. So Michael from YouTube says, I want to use ChatGPT platform. LinkedIn is so saturated and it's hard to get noticed. I agree with that 100%. Joe is saying, I think OpenAI is going to have to build in multimodal learning into their new learning platform if they want to be competitive and successful. That's a great point, Joe. To compete with Notebook LM, and their true learning capabilities there with the multimodality, with the video overviews, the audio overviews. I agree 100%, right? It leaves me wanting a lot. So I use ChatGPT a lot when I'm out, going for a walk or something like that. And I use the read aloud mode. And so many times I'm like, yeah, this would be way better if I could just use kind of true multimodality in learning. If I could have a video overview, if I could have an audio overview that I could talk with. So, there's certain aspects of learning something in Notebook LM versus learning something in OpenAI's ChatGPT. And I wish you could just kind of combine the best of both worlds. So we'll see if ChatGPT/OpenAI does improve kind of that experience once they do roll this certification out. But yeah, I would love to hear. Are you going to do it? Are you going to do this OpenAI ChatGPT certification when it comes out? And do you think that this will rival LinkedIn? Personally, I don't think it will, but it's making pretty big news regardless. All right, our next piece of AI news, a pretty big acquisition, maybe from a company or two you haven't heard of, but Atlassian has said it will acquire New York-based The Browser Company for $610 million in cash, a move that pushes its products, Jira and Confluence, deeper into the AI-powered browsing for work. So, according to reports from Reuters, shares of Atlassian, the publicly traded company that acquired The Browser Company, fell about 2% after the acquisition announcement, signaling investor caution as the company expands into a kind of crowded category. So this deal adds the very popular Dia browser. So that is their kind of AI agentic browser from The Browser Company to the Atlassian portfolio. So Dia was launched earlier this year, and Atlassian reportedly plans to position this as its go-to work browser that pulls together tasks and different tools across the web and adds enterprise context. So the AI browser market is heating up as startups and incumbents race to add agent-like features that summarize pages and can also take actions for you. So I would say that Dia was one of the main leaders that wasn't a tech trillionaire company, aside from Perplexity, which I would say is the leader with their Comet browser. But other companies that are building on top of Google Chrome's Chromium, including Microsoft Edge. Reportedly, OpenAI is going to be announcing an agentic browser. You have the Brave company, their Leo browser. So pretty interesting here that you have just an enterprise company acquiring this. And we're going to see what they're actually going to use it for. But it's a pretty interesting acquisition. So I did not have this on my AI acquisition bingo card. If anyone would have acquired the browser company, I would have thought it would have been someone like Meta or AWS or even OpenAI. So I did not really see a company like Atlassian being the one that would acquire this company. All right. Did OpenAI solve hallucinations? Well, according to a new OpenAI research paper, they say they at least kind of figured out why large language models hallucinate to begin with. So, according to OpenAI's new research paper, which we shared about in our newsletter last week, that's why you got to read it all. All right. So, they're saying that large language models mainly hallucinate because of training and evaluation methods reward confident guessing over admitting uncertainty. So, OpenAI researchers argue that accuracy-based evaluations act like a constant test taking, and that encourages models to guess when they're unsure, rather than just being like, yeah, you know what? I don't know. So essentially, when you can confidently guess something, even if a large language model is fairly confident but not sure, confidently guessing something and getting it right has kind of trained these models over time to just confidently guess, even when they're not 100% sure, because that's what you're rewarded for, right? They're not rewarded in their testing and evaluation phase for saying, I'm not sure or I don't know. So OpenAI says that, well, yeah, hallucinations could be fixed, and they just need to redesign primary evaluation metrics so they stop penalizing models that just say, hey, I don't know, and they start discouraging guessing, which they say would reduce these false statements or hallucinations that are ultimately and very confidently presented as facts. So the paper notes that many models are effectively trained to treat questions as binary. So there's either correct or incorrect answers. And that is sometimes a mismatch with real world scenarios where uncertainty is common and stating limits is actually valuable. So OpenAI contrasted approaches by noting in a prior blog post that Anthropic's Claude tends to express uncertainty more often, which can reduce errors but may increase refusal rates that limit usefulness. All right, this is one of those things that a lot of people don't understand. Large language models, literally most of them in their system prompt, are trained to be a helpful assistant. So what the AI researchers, I would say from the early 2020s through maybe 2023, 2024, probably pushed that a little too hard. And, this causes large language models, even when they are not entirely sure, to be helpful and to solve a user's query, because saying like, I don't know, is not very helpful. So a pretty promising piece of research out of OpenAI. And researchers also talked about the kind of sometimes problematic with leaderboards, right? So if evaluation leaderboards continue to reward accuracy without penalizing guessing, OpenAI warned in their paper that models will keep learning to guess, right? So they're kind of going through this awkward reinforcement learning phase where guessing is actually rewarded, because many times large language models will guess it correctly even when they are not entirely sure, where they would normally just be penalized if they're like saying, I don't know. So researchers recommended aligning benchmarks with real world needs by rewarding calibrated responses, such as just saying, I don't know, or when models say that they aren't sure and then ask clarifying questions to get a more accurate answer. So I don't know. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Right? If you're using a large language model, let's say, I don't know, let's say you do 100 prompts a day, which I'd say for our audience might be kind of about standard. And let's say right now you get 0 times a large language model says, I don't know. But do you know when it hallucinates? Right? Most models are usually less than a 1% hallucination rate, but that one may be big. So let's say you use a large language model 100 times a day and you get one hallucination, but you're not sure it hallucinates because the model isn't like, hey, I'm not 100% sure, but here's what I think. Instead, it just accurately responds. So over the course of maybe a month, You have 30 hallucinations on your hand that you probably didn't know were hallucinations because a model is trained to be helpful and to be confident in giving you an answer. So, would you rather have that? If you're a power user of a large language model, and I'm not just talking about ChatGPT, would you rather have 30 hallucinations over the course of a month and not necessarily know? Or maybe out of those 100 prompts, would you rather have 10 times a day where a large language model is just like, not sure? Or 5 times a day, right? Even 5 times a day, that's 150 times a week where you're hoping to get a helpful response from a large language model. And it's like, you're on your own, buddy. Which one's better? I don't know. I'd say probably the latter versus the former, because I'd say AI hallucinations are a much bigger problem than people realize, right? Even because that 1 degree of accuracy in that one hallucination, maybe out of 100, which is still higher, a much higher hallucination rate, but I'm just saying it to round up to the nearest percentile. It's a much bigger problem than people realize because number one, when we talk about an agentic future, that 1% compounds, right? But not only that, people look at large language models as the ultimate truth, where a lot of times, if you're looking at the internet, well, hopefully, you don't view the internet in the same way. You have a certain degree of skepticism where you're like, all right, well, maybe not everything I read online is true, right? That famous quote from Abe Lincoln, you can trust, what is it? Like everything you read on the internet is true. Abe Lincoln, right? So I don't know which one's more helpful, but regardless, a pretty interesting piece of research from OpenAI. So make sure if you haven't read that already, we'll put it again in our newsletter. 2 tech trillionaires teaming up. That's our next piece of AI news this week. But it's competitors. And this is not a good look for Apple. So Apple has, according to reports from Bloomberg, signed a formal agreement with Google to integrate a custom version of Google's Gemini into Apple's upcoming new version of Siri called World Knowledge Answers, essentially an answers engine. It's going to be Apple's new web-based answers engine slated for public launch in March 2026. And this news moved markets. So Google's shares in their parent company, Alphabet, jumped about 9%. Yeah, they had some other good news that week, but instantly responded with a 9% jump, which is crazy. That's like $250 million in market cap that Google added because of this news. And Apple's stock rose about 3%, signaling that investors expect Google to gain more upside from the deal than Apple. So the integration is designed, and here's kind of how it works, or reportedly how this new integration, this smarter AI Siri internally called World Knowledge Answers, will work. So the integration is designed so that Google's Gemini model, a version that's specifically made for this instance, runs inside of Apple's secure private cloud compute, keeping processing on Apple-controlled servers to preserve Apple's privacy stance. So Siri's architecture will split users' tasks, and Apple's own foundational models will handle queries involving users' personal data, while Google's custom version of Gemini for this Apple integration will power the web summarization for general knowledge in real-time web answers, according to Bloomberg. So the World Knowledge Answers experience will start in Siri, reportedly as soon as spring 2026, then expand to Safari, its browser, and Spotlight, offering AI-generated summaries from web results with text, photos, videos, and also local points of interest. So Apple reportedly evaluated Anthropic as well as an alternative and even considered acquiring Perplexity, but ultimately chose Google, its chief competitor, for their speed and reliability. So this move follows a series of years of Apple's huge AI missteps. So they've had internal models missing benchmarks after reportedly spending millions of dollars a day trying to develop a capable large language model, which they really haven't done. And some reporting that said Siri's internal team said that they just quote unquote couldn't get it to work properly, and multiple lawsuits that Apple is facing because of their false advertising over the last year and a half since the WWDC announcement of their Apple Intelligence in 2024, essentially promoting and marketing all of these AI features that just didn't exist. They didn't work because Apple couldn't get them to work. So now, to deal with this, Apple had to spend a lot of money, an unreported sum, but I'm guessing it's a ton, and had to eat crow and ask Google, their biggest competitor, for help. That is a bad look. So, if you want to know more about this, we did cover this one late last week, right after it broke. So make sure that you go check out episode 603 from the Everyday AI podcast, where we did break that one down into more depth. All right, let's get chippy with it, y'all. Our next piece of AI news: OpenAI might be starting to develop its own in-house AI chip in a deal with Broadcom. So, according to reports, OpenAI is planning to start using a custom AI chip co-designed with Broadcom as soon as next year to address surging compute demand and also reduce reliance on NVIDIA. So, Broadcom's CEO referenced a new major customer committing to about $10 billion in orders, which reports essentially identified as OpenAI. So, this new joint chip is slated for only internal use at OpenAI and not for external sale, positioning ChatGPT and other services for steadier compute access during peak loads. So this aligns OpenAI with Google, Amazon, and Meta, which have all built their own accelerators to control cost, performance, and supply risk for AI workloads. So the collaboration reportedly began last year, with clearer timelines emerging now that shipments are targeted for next year, pending production ramp success. So Broadcom added a fourth marquee custom AI chip customer. Them adding a fourth marquee custom AI chip customer signals accelerating demand for tailored silicon chips as AI model sizes and usage grow. And if successful, OpenAI could shift pricing leverage away from NVIDIA and speed future rollouts to end users by reducing compute bottlenecks. So there's been actually, OpenAI has faced a lot of downage issues over the last few weeks. They had a pretty bad one last week. And essentially, I don't think many people, even if you go back to when ChatGPT first came out a few years ago, I don't think you would foresee that OpenAI would have this many users, 100 million weekly active users using their platform, which is just an astronomical number. But what this has led to is OpenAI hasn't been able to keep up with demand, right? So essentially, the larger AI industry earlier on in the generative AI boom, let's just say from 2020 to 2023, so many of the big companies relied solely on NVIDIA. But now you've seen some success, as an example, with Google's internal TPU chips. Microsoft has started to develop their own chips as well, their NPU chips. So pretty bold move here. OpenAI partnering with one of the biggest chip makers in the game in Broadcom to essentially develop their own chip that won't even be available to anyone else. So we'll see how this pans out and if ultimately this leads to less downtime for one of the most popular AI products on the planet. All right. Our next piece of AI news: just about everyone in AI was just at the White House, and some new reports have kind of suggested what this big meeting was about. So, US President Donald Trump hosted a White House dinner with top AI leaders to spotlight pledges for huge AI investments, with a focus on fast tracking permits and ensuring enough electricity for energy hungry data centers that the biggest companies in the world were buying. So, as an example, Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, who was at the meeting, said the company plans to invest at least $600 billion in the US through 2028, including a $50 billion data center in Louisiana. Apple's Tim Cook, also reportedly at the meeting, said Apple had added $100 billion to its U.S. manufacturing plans, bringing its total pledge to $600 billion. And Trump signals those commitments could help Apple avoid some upcoming semiconductor tariffs. Interesting how that works, and that these things are just being reported out there in the wild by, a big company like Apple saying, oh, we're going to invest all this money. And then Trump saying, well, maybe you can avoid the tariffs then. Apparently, that's how politics works now, very out in the open. So Trump reportedly told executives that his administration is making it easier to secure electric capacity and also permits for data centers, essentially greenlighting those from major tech companies. And he claimed the U.S. is well ahead of China in AI. I would argue that that is not necessarily true. I would say China is very close, not very, the US is not very far ahead of China, especially if we look at humanoids and robotics. China is light years ahead. And if that is kind of one of the end game goals of AI, right, it being used in the real world, maybe the US is winning the sprint, but China may be winning the actual race. We'll see. But the guest list included OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman, Google's Sundar Pichai, Microsoft's Satya Nadella, Bill Gates, and more, marking a very rare high-level alignment around domestic AI expansion here in the US. Notably absent. It was like, oh, everyone from every single AI company except XAI's Elon Musk's. So this was Donald Trump's former kind of right-hand man for a while, and they had a very public, very messy divorce. So it looks like, unfortunately, Elon wasn't invited to the table. So the White House spotlighted a lot of plans that are bringing more demand to U.S. soil, and the administration's AI agenda, guided by White House AI advisor David Sachs, centers on easing federal regulation, boosting research and development dollars around AI, and expanding domestic energy production to keep the U.S. competitive. And companies are signaling more U.S. expansion in exchange for reducing their tariff exposure, with Trump indicating firms that build domestically could receive relief on some of the recently enacted import duties. Wow. Michael said this dinner scared me. Yeah, it is. It was kind of crazy to see every single AI leader around the table except Elon Musk. And I'm just imagining him watching this, plotting what he's going to do next. I don't know, with robots and taxis, right? They're robo taxis and all these things. So we'll see how this ultimately shakes out. But pretty huge news, right? Essentially saying that the federal government is not only going to be expediting and greenlighting these data center expansions in ways that they normally wouldn't have, right? So not just waiving all the yellow tape, but essentially waiving the yellow tape, but also promising in exchange for breaking ground in U.S. soil on these data centers, essentially saying, yeah, we'll let these whole tariff things slide for you guys if you build more in the U.S. All right, two more pieces of AI news. So Midjourney has another big company coming for them. So, Warner Brothers Discovery has filed a federal lawsuit in California accusing the AI image generating platform Midjourney of using illegal copies of its work to train and sell their commercial AI image service, escalating the broader fight over AI and intellectual property. So, Warner Brothers seeks up to $150,000 per infringed work, which would be like, I don't know, what's more than a trillion? That would be like a quadrillion dollars, $150,000 per piece of infringed work. I mean, you can't prove how many there were, but there's got to be tens of millions or hundreds of millions, presumably, pieces of potentially copyrighted works. And they cite, so Warner Brothers cited a lot of examples of their IP being used inside Midjourney, such as Bugs Bunny, Superman, Batman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Scooby-Doo, and the Powerpuff Girls. Yeah, don't forget about the Powerpuff Girls. So the complaint argues that Midjourney creates consumer confusion by suggesting it's large-scale copying, and the resulting images are authorized for use when they obviously are not. Warner Brothers Discovery says it brought the case to protect its content, creative partners, and financial investments, framing the dispute as a defense of storyteller rights. So the case follows a related case from other media giants, including some pretty big lawsuits by Disney and Universal, and comes amid recent high-dollar AI copyright settlements, such as a $1.5 billion settlement from Anthropic. So the core legal question is whether training on copyrighted material and generating outputs that replicate recognizable characters constitutes as infringements, a decision that could set influential precedent. So yeah, this one is pretty big. And again, I'm no legal expert, but it seems kind of cut and dry. And here's the reason. I think with large language models, when you're looking at text outputs, you can argue that there's some gray area, right? AI images, not so much, right? If you pop out a verbatim copy of Bugs Bunny or Superman or Batman and are using that in any way, it's a little harder to argue that it's not just blatant copyright theft. So, some pretty solid cases, I would say, from both Warner Brothers and obviously the previous lawsuit, which we talked about in depth on this show a couple of months ago from Universal and Disney. All right, one more piece of AI news. I think I flipped past it in my slides, but speaking of big lawsuits, we can't skip over this one. Anthropic has agreed to pay at least $1.5 billion to authors to settle claims that it used copyrighted books without permission to train its AI systems. So the deal sets a minimum payout of roughly $3,000 per infringed book, giving the author industry a clear per work benchmark for compensating rights holders. So plaintiffs called the terms critical victories and warned that going to trial posed an enormous risk. And Anthropic faced potential exposure of more than $1 trillion if it lost. So versus a $1.5 billion settlement, it seems that Anthropic was maybe okay with paying that $1.5 billion fine, because if they lost, if they took it all the way to trial and didn't settle, court documents showed that this could have been a $1 trillion settlement. So the lawsuit focused on Anthropic's early data gathering practices, including downloading reportedly unauthorized copies of books to build training data sets for its model. So this agreement is likely to shape future licensing negotiations across publishing, music, and media by pricing past use and signaling the cost of unlicensed scraping. All right. Our last big piece of AI news before we get into the roundup section, pretty good news for Google. Wow, Midjourney is facing some bad news in the court, and Anthropic got bad news. Google got a piece of good news. So, a US district judge has declined to order a breakup of Google following a 2024 ruling that found the company illegally monopolized online search, a decision that could keep Google intact while the market shifts toward an AI driven answer engine economy. So, essentially, what this boiled down to and what this allows, at least for now, it allows Google to keep Chrome and Android while imposing restrictions after that 2024 finding that said Google illegally maintained a search monopoly. So, yeah, there were some reports that Google may have to sell off its Chrome browser and or its Android operating system, but sounds like they won't, according to this new ruling from a US district judge. This still could go higher, but right now the ruling also bars Google from entering into exclusive distribution deals for Google Search, Chrome, Google Assistant, or the Gemini app, allowing phone makers to preload or promote competing search engines, browser, and AI assistants. So the court ordered Google to also share certain search data with competitors, and Google says it will appeal that, which could delay when any data sharing requirements take effect. So the judge cited fast changing competition from artificial intelligence as a reason to avoid the most severe remedies, such as Google having to sell off Chrome, noting advancements by firms like OpenAI have reshaped the search market. So, according to trial disclosures, Google paid more than $26 billion in 2021 to Apple and Mozilla and others for default placement deals for making their Google the default search engine in Apple's Safari and Mozilla's Firefox, a practice that will now face tighter limits rather than just a strict ban. So analysts described the remedies as less heavy-handed than originally expected, and industry watchers say that Google Search is still projected to generate close to $200 billion this fiscal year, with tens of billions of dollars flowing to distribution partners. So this case, though, doesn't get Google completely out of the water, as it's separate from an ongoing U.S. Department of Justice action alleging that Google holds a monopoly in ad tech, which was brought with 17 states. And Google says it will appeal that decision as well. So, yeah, there's kind of multiple big suits and big cases that Google was facing, and this is one of them, a pretty big win, although there are some bullet points and some changes to their current setup there. All right, that was a ton. There's more. We can't get to every single big AI piece of AI news, but we will give you the bullet point roundup. So this is kind of our newer segment at the very end of our AI news recaps on Mondays, essentially what's new and what's next. So some of these are rumors that are on pretty good terms, and some of these are just new releases that didn't quite make our, top 10 AI news stories of the week. So here we go. Get your pencils ready. There won't be a test, but you might want to know some of these things. Here we go. So Notebook LM teased flashcards and quizzes literally the day after I said that they should be rolling these out. OpenAI acqui-hired Alex, a YC-backed startup known as the cursor for Xcode. ChatGPT's projects are now available in a limited capacity to free users of the platform. Perplexity's Comet browser is reportedly rolling out to Android and iOS phones, and it's made free to college students worldwide. Pretty big. Great time to be a college student, get all this stuff for free. China's DeepSeek will reportedly release an agent to compete with OpenAI's agent by the end of this year. Google's Nano Banana launched a dedicated Twitter account where you can tweet at it and it will create images from text prompts. Very cool. So you don't even have to use the platform. You can just tweet at them and get an image from them, the best image model in the world. More Notebook LM updates. They added new default audio overview styles. So they've only had the deep dive, but now there is the brief the critique, and the debate. So some new modes. Claude can now remember past chats for pro users. After the memory was announced last month, it just started to roll out. OpenAI, in some news, announced that it will burn through $115 billion through 2029. Claude is teasing a new feature that will create files inside of its chatbot. Chinese giant Alibaba released Qwen 3 Max preview, their newest large language model, and it's benchmarking really well. AI image generator Ideogram launched a new styles feature to get kind of consistent styles across generation. France's Mistral closed a $2.3 billion funding round. OpenAI is rolling out parental controls inside ChatGPT over the next month. That one's interesting and will be fascinating to see how that's actually policed. Google has cut its VO3 API prices by up to 60% for some models. And OpenAI acquired StatSig to bolster its internal applications team. Whew, that was a lot. All right. I hope this was helpful. If so, please reshare this with your audience. But let's do a quick rundown of our main stories. So first, OpenAI is planning to launch a new AI-driven job platform as well as certifications. Atlassian acquired the browser company for $610 million. OpenAI kind of came out with a great report investigating why large language models hallucinate the way that they do. Apple has tapped its chief rival, Google, to power a future version of their AI Siri. Anthropic has agreed to pay $1.5 billion in their author settlement case. OpenAI is reportedly going to debut an in-house AI chip in partnership with Broadcom, which may ship next year. U.S. President Donald Trump was courting big tech for a massive U.S. AI build-out. Warner Brothers is suing Midjourney over alleged copyright theft. And a U.S. judge has declined to force Google to break up. All right, that was a ton of AI news. Don't spend hours trying to keep up every day. We do this almost every single Monday, bringing you the AI news that matters, cutting through the fluff, saving you time, and telling you, here's what you need to focus on. Here's the AI news that's going to impact your company or career. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, go to youreverydayai.com. We'll see you back tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.